Hi, Michael. Good to have you here today.
Hey, Karen.
I contacted you because I thought it would be really interesting, given your background in cybersecurity and your background in just tech stuff in general on the internet, because I've been thinking about this whole issue with the coronavirus and the way that the world is in what I'm calling the Great Reordering. I think there's this massive sea change coming globally and within each nation as well. And we see that regarding all sorts of areas like our limits of capacity, our economic limits, our boundaries. Everything is changing. And I especially was thinking about something Jordan Peterson said in one of his videos about, he was quoting Jung. And I believe the phrase he used was something that Jung had talked about called solve e coagula, which basically means to dissolve and then rebuild, or to deform and then reform. And it looks to me as though globally we're having this huge deformation, and there's going to be a reforming that comes out of it. We don't know what that reforming is going to look like. But here's this virus. It's just this tiny little virus. It's like a tiny virus that might have just hacked into a computer system somewhere and eaten up the whole inside of the system. And that's what it's doing globally to us. It's just eating up the whole inside of the system. And so I thought it might be interesting to approach this from two different angles, and you can pick whichever one you want. I was thinking we could look at when the first virus showed up in computers, how did that affect the computer industry, and what approach did they take to solve the problem? And would there be any corollaries with what's happening today on this grander scale with the human virus? Or we could just approach it from a standpoint of all of these issues related to the meaning crisis seem to have come up to this place in time, and there's going to be some kind of a resolution to all of this. And how could we look at the meaning crisis in a way that would be meaningful going forward, that might help everyone to make some sense out of what is coming, because we know some huge change is coming.
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack there. The virus is I find I don't think I'm smart enough to really comment on what it means, but it is. I find it really fascinating that there's something here that's been occupying the entire consciousness of the world in a simultaneous way. And not only that, but kind of creating this social and all this pressure to change the way we act. I don't it's I can't really think of anything other than outside of biblical stories that amounts to this level of kind of um, a global event that impacts everybody in a certain way. And in terms of what it means, it kind of just boggles the mind. But I think, it certainly is some sort of product. It's some sort of representation of an element of the chaos that this element of the unknown that's there all the time, and we're kind of blissfully unaware of, and we've just gotten exposed to just a little bit of it, in the form of this virus, and how much what it reveals in terms of the fragileness or brittleness of our current civilization. that there's certain assumptions that we've built things on that are very kind of narrow in their definitions of reality, and aren't able to sustain this kind of, even this what should be a relatively small intrusion into our lives is really quite significant because of just we've built this titanic system that has to work in very precise ways, and any sort of disruption to it, and it kind of starts shutting down.
Well, I can resonate so much with that, because one of the things that has really, in a way, it's kind of thrown me for a loop. And I think that's because I typically walk around in a little bit of denial about what the world actually looks like. I'm able most of the time to just shut out the chaos and
Hmm.
shut out the suffering, the pain that is all in the world. But it's like this, like ripped a Band-Aid off, and all of a sudden we not only see the suffering of the people who are suffering from this illness, but we can see all of a sudden the economic suffering of the people who are the most vulnerable in the world, and how that's going to be exacerbated by this situation. And we can see the physical suffering of so many vulnerable people who are more vulnerable to this virus because of physical problems that they already have. And we've just become so conscious of the range of suffering that's taking place all the time in the chaos in the world. I know for a long time when I was watching Jordan Peterson, I'd get so frustrated with him when he would say, yes, life is suffering. And I think, no, you don't, that's not quite right. Yes, there is suffering, but it's not life is suffering. But now that this has happened, and I'm confronted on a moment by moment basis with what really goes on in the world all the time, in this world of chaos that's just outside of our consciousness, I think he's right, that there is some fundamental way in which life is suffering. And that's been very hard for me to get a grip on, because
Hmm.
I liked living in my Pollyanna world. and, and I think that's gone forever. That world is gone forever. And so I'm just going to do this. I got an email yesterday from somebody who said that he had received this from somebody else. So it's one of these emails that's making the rounds, and I'm going to modify it just a little bit, but it's talking about all the things that we worship, and how what has happened now has to change all of that. So we've been worshiping athletes, but now there are no stadiums and no arenas. We've been worshiping musicians, but now there's no venues for concerts. We've been worshiping actors, but now there's no movie theaters to go to the movie theaters and see the actors. We've worshiped money, so now the economy is shut down, and the stock market has collapsed. We worship our own bodies and our own fitness, and now there are no gyms to go and build all those six packs with. And we've worshipped our own intellect, and now all the universities are shut down, and all the things that we have worshipped and put our trust in are gone. And all of a sudden we have to, our focus has to change. Now, where that focus is going to go, we have no idea. But as a global civilization, the place that our focus and our intentionality has gone in the past is going to change. There's no option. It's just going to change. I don't think there's any going back to where we were. Even if everything somehow miraculously reforms again in 3 months and the world goes back to the way it was, people are not going to be the same inside in the way that they look at those things again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like you were saying, though, I mean, when you encounter suffering, you can have one or two responses to it. It can make you kind of there can be this kind of benderness and uh, negativity and nihilism that can grow as a result of that, or it can be um, a kind of kick in the butt, or an impetus to change how you see the world, and realize, okay, there's things that my realizing that your account of the world was missing some pieces and needed some some updating. And I think it's one of those things. It's whether you look at and want to blame if you look for like evil outside of yourself in terms of explaining the suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and you want it to all exist out there, versus whether you look inside and see what what what's wrong with you specifically that contributed to the world being in such a state that it arrived here. And that's difficult to do. um, but I think that's the right approach. I mean, and that's, leaning back to Jordan, that's exactly where he would start.
Mm-hmm.
you know you got to start with yourself and see, what. And that's a big thing in Dostoevsky's writing as well. It's like this reoccurring theme of, the holiest people in his books, they see themselves as responsible for everything. And there's one of his characters even makes the comment one time that, that if you can live this reality, you are already in heaven. That you see that everything around you, you are responsible, and that this is what it means to be human. Um, and it's a very strange idea. It's very it's like a mystical kind of thing. But I don't know. I think in the writings and the lectures of Jordan Peterson, you can see that there's very practical ways in which that's actually true, in which you tend to think of yourself as being insignificant and not having much of a role to play, but he makes very convincing arguments that you can see the ways in which these decisions you make, have effects that go out into the world, and that the truth is always so much more powerful than the lie. So that, you can, one person who really speaks the truth forcefully and refuses to go along with a system that is built on lies, can overthrow that whole thing. you know and he always likes to hold up, Solzhenitsyn as an example of that. um so I think it's like you said, it's the reality we're facing right now is a reality of how bad the suffering really is, and how that's kind of woven into the fabric of reality in ways in which we in the modern world would like to pretend we have fixes for that get rid of them all. um so that confrontation is difficult, but it can lead you to one of two places, which is, hey, the world's a crappy place. um, God's a crappy God because, or whoever created this, whoever's responsible for this, made a bunch of mistakes and it's their fault. Or you can have this other sense of like, why am I not able to contribute to help make this better? Am I actually part of the problem?
Mm-hmm.
I think are the two choices you have. And it's not super clear which one is going to win the day at the moment. But I don't know. I'm hopeful.
Well, when you were saying that, well, for one thing, that the truth is always more powerful than the lie, um, that goes back to Owen Barfield and some of his views that were based on, I'm assuming were based on some of the findings in quantum physics, that this idea that reality exists because we are conscious beings and we are looking at things and we are representing those things with our consciousness, and that well, not that reality exists because of our consciousness, but that the way that reality represents itself to us is a function of our consciousness and how we see things. I didn't really probably put that in the best words, but you know, when Barfield talks about the representation of something, and how there is something about that which is unrepresented that is more fundamentally real than the representation that we make out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we begin to worship the representation, that's when it becomes an idol, whether it's, you know, some actual idol, or whether it's just something that, you know, it could be any object, anything that we represent to ourselves. But that the unrepresented, the thing that is the fundamental meaning that's behind all that, is the thing that is most real. And there's some sense in which the way that philosophy and science have moved along over the centuries, we came to some sort of an impasse where we got some sort of strange idea about what was actually meaning. And it makes me think about an email that you wrote a while back about the difference between reason and logic. Because if you go down the path of strictly logic, then all of a sudden meaning starts to get completely lost. And that's kind of how we've ended up where we are today. So I wondered if you could flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah. The whole reason versus logic, I think, corresponds well to Barfield's, you know, the represented versus the unrepresented in these, seeing the world either as icons or idols. There's fundamentally, because of the fact that we are, you know, finite creatures presented with a world of infinite facts. I mean, they're not infinite, but relative to we are so finite and so small that the facts that confront us are might as well be infinite. And yet we still have to live and move and make decisions on a moment by moment basis. And so obviously, to deal with that, there has to be this intermediary structure whereby we process the world. And that's the representations in the Barfield speak, or you know, this is also something, you know, Jordan talks about a lot too. Like, this is kind of this intermediate structure for us in some sense is reality, because it's the mechanism whereby we're able to squeeze the infinity around us into something that we can interact with, that we can communicate, that we can talk about. All these things, you know, language is a big part of this, of that, you know, representative structure. And so built into this is we always have to maintain some sort of tacit recognition of the disconnect between our representations and the reality that they're there to represent. And part of what that means is that those representations we have to be working to update them all the time. It's like a never ending task. And I think this is where the difference between reason and logic come in, because reason always has before it the evermoreness of reality. I would say one of the things that reason always has within it is love. And there's a self-sacrificial nature to love, which is coupled to knowledge, because that's the only way in which you actually get to know things. Something about you and your representational structure of things has to be deformed and changed before you can actually, you know, come to know with anything, even a simple thing like, you know, how to use a computer, or how to write your name. All this, something inside of you has to kind of change shape to model that new reality. Um, Whereas within logic, there's a pretense within logic to, first of all, a kind of sort of fake eternality. Like this is locked in time. This is ever true within its current, you know, brittle form. And there's also a sense of having that logic. Man, I don't even know how to say this properly, but it has all these assumptions about um the kind of the like the level of detail we can go into in comprehending something. So I mean, logic works great within a formal system that is of our own devising, but it breaks down quickly when it gets applied in the real world. When I have a false dichotomy and I say person X must be good or evil, you know, they can't be, there's no middle ground. They have to be one or the other. That false dichotomy is really, really harmful.
Well, so that goes back to another comment you made about how we've lost our sense-making ability so much because we have this idea that people's political opinions are either correct or they're evil. There's no in between ground. So if you're on one side of the political spectrum, you're looking at the other side of the spectrum as being evil. Not that you both have perspectives, and that those two perspectives, if a discussion could be had, those two perspectives might be able to get up above that somehow in some sort of a meta view, and take a look at those two perspectives and come up with some solutions. But we never get up to the meta place at all, because the one side is looking at the other side and saying, oh, they're evil. And then this side's looking at this side saying, no, you're evil. And that has been so toxic and so like an acid eating away at the inside of not just our nation, but every nation. And
Yeah.
I think that what has happened now is that there are so many unknowns, and every single person on the planet is dealing with so many unknowns, and they have to acknowledge that these are unknowns. Nobody has the answer. It doesn't fit inside anybody's system. And because it doesn't fit inside anybody's system, we have to find some new way of looking at it, some new way of I know the word that keeps coming back to me is grace. You know, to be able to give grace to people who are struggling with this. I hear all these accusations against all the world leaders and all the mistakes that they've made and everything else. And then I kind of try to put myself in their place and think, I'm every day making decisions that are life and death decisions for hundreds of millions of people. And I'm guessing that every one of those people is doing their utmost to try to understand the information that's coming at them and make the best decisions that they can make. Mistakes are made, absolutely. There's no question about that. But if we could at least grant our leaders the grace of being able to say, we believe you're trying to do your best. How can we come alongside and make things better? What can we do where we can help this thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that it's an election year here in the States. um, it's it's funny because, you know, what you what you train your eye to see, you'll see more of. And I don't think we know to what degree that seeing more of actually also brings that thing into being as well. Kind of reflecting back on what you said, because I mean, let's say like in a conversation between the two of us right now, you know, if I see kind of the worst in you, and there are, I mean, like with both of us, let's just, you know, admit there's things about us that are wrong and need to be improved in so many different manner. And if I focused on those things and that's all I saw about you and that's all you saw about me, like there would be, you, in some sense, those things would likely manifest themselves even more in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I if let's say you were dealing with somebody that's very unhappy and they want to argue and they don't really want to have a conversation, but you are patiently focused on the best parts of them, the real reason why they're argumentative, and like that, and you, that's all you see and choose to interact with. In some sense, you call that thing out of them more into being, even though they want to display a completely different mode of being. They're going to, and there's a negotiation in any interaction for what takes place. And I don't think we maybe think about how when we assume the worst about somebody, we actually get that from them, you know, especially with these leaders, you know. um it just, I've given up on politics so many times in this country because it's there's something about the two-party system that's really, really toxic in terms of, I don't actually have to have any good ideas. I just need to show that I'm better than that person. So it's like there's this built-in false dichotomy. I don't have to be good. I just need to show they're evil. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a certain, along with that comes a anything you relay that's of specific detail about whatever your plans are to make the world a better place actually just increases the surface area for you yourself to be attacked. And because you're going to make some mistakes, no matter the best laid plans that you have at the scale of you know, a country with 300 million people, there's going to be all kinds of problems with it. And
Mm-hmm.
so the more specific detail you go into, you've just created you know, an area for your opponent to attack. So everything's like, it's really moved the debate into all these kind of, nobody wants to get into the real details of how to solve any problems anymore, because you're too exposed doing that. And it's all about these kind of gotcha, you know, things where you just find where the other person, oh, this person lied, or they flip-flopped, or they here they said something and then they did this something, or they said this 5 years ago, or they did this 20 years ago. And it's like, it's just this weird I don't know. I don't know what motivates it, but I think a big part of it is the two-party system. You know, you can't, because if you had more options, you know, and both parties were behaving so badly, some third option could come in and fill the void, you know, with an alternative. But that's doesn't really work in our system, because if you come in as a third party, you actually just steal votes from the person you're closest to ideologically, right? So that you almost guarantee that they're going to lose in the general election if you go that far. For instance, yeah. So I mean, I don't know. There's something really kind of broken and toxic about that that system that I feel like is become a kind of phenomenon worldwide. I feel like more and more countries you see are having this kind of very much, even parliamentary systems that tend to by their nature have a lot more diversity, are becoming more polarized into two strong party systems, like on either side, that are gaining the bulk of the following and control. And I don't know, something is really bad about that, I think, in terms of the kind of dialogue
It's really interesting the way you brought that up because as you were talking, I'm thinking back over history and I'm thinking, when did it really start getting so toxic? And um, I mean, we've always had debate with the two parties in this country, and pretty extreme debates around the elections. But the elections used to last 2 or 3 months, and that was it. And then you had this very contentious debating. You had the election, and then afterwards it was over, and we all went back to being friends. And you could love your family members who thought differently than you did. But um, probably around the assassination of JFK, and then later RFK and Martin Luther King, and Vietnam, right around that era, there started to be this kind of splintering of the parties. And so when you get, I remember, for example, John Anderson, who ran against maybe it was Gerald Ford, whoever was running against Carter. John Anderson, I think, was this splinter character who siphoned off a lot of votes from, I believe it was the Republican Party. And what happens when you get a splinter element like that, as you were saying, is that now we've divided more finely the arguments. And so within a party, you get people saying, well, you're not far enough this way and you're not far enough that way. And in order to differentiate themselves, they're painting each other in more extreme language. And so that splintering actually is increasing the polarizing. It's almost better to have a strictly two-party system without any options for extra parties, because the extra parties coming in start peeling off, shaving off, and making more extreme the arguments of everybody inside that party where the splintering is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And we've mostly seen that on the right in this country for a long time. It's mostly been on the right that there's been these splinter parties that moving more libertarian away from the old line Republican. But this cycle, we've seen that splintering happening in the Democrat Party as well. And you've seen these huge extremes growing inside the Democrat Party that weren't there before. So we've started to completely lose the middle now, because the two extremes are going off into this splintering thing. So I wonder if there's not a problem with the atomizing. You know how we talked before about how everything is starting to atomize, everything is breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces everywhere. And it kind of seems like even the political system is starting to break down into smaller and smaller pieces lately. Now, in a country where they have a multi-party system, they probably don't have that same kind of splintering problem, because they can form coalitions even between two parties that are quite separate in their way of looking at the world.
Right. But within a parliamentarian style government, you can do that.
Yeah.
It's not an option. It's like a winner take all in our system.
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's scary. I remember reading a book by C.S. Lewis a long time ago. It was like a book called Studies in Words. And I'm thinking now later that he must have been influenced by Barfield to write this book, because Barfield had written a book much earlier on the history of words. But one of the observations C.S. Lewis makes in that book is how any word that gets taken up by some sort of political movement almost immediately ceases to have any sort of descriptive meaning attached to it. It starts quickly to become a synonym for either good or bad, depending on which side of the argument you're standing. And he kind of showcased all these different words that kind of had been co-opted. And I think that is a real problem, where I don't know, we don't have a lot of bandwidth for, or toleration for complexity. Because the problems that we're trying to solve at this point, being such and relatively prosperous country, they're complex, and it's the system that you're dealing with has all kinds of, like, if you make a change here, that there's all kinds of unintended consequences with that. And so how do we deal with those? How do we think about those? um, there's not a lot of tolerance for a national debate that includes a complex kind of conversation on those subjects. And so, the results we get, at a national level, the politics are kind of predictable, right? If it's not demanded of you, as a political candidate, to be thoughtful in that way, um, why would you? Again, it's another liability if you get down in the weeds with that stuff, because it's just, again, it's more attack surface area for your opponent, because you're going to make some mistake if you go down into the weeds with what you're trying to propose. So,
Well, and I think if we take the metaphor back to the human level, how Jordan Peterson is always talking about how you expose your values by your behavior. You can say you believe one thing, but if you're not acting according to that, then that's not really what you believe. What you really believe is the way that you're acting. And so that's as true of a political party as it is of an individual. So political parties can talk all they want about what it is that they believe, or what it is that they stand for, or what their platform is, but it's what they actually produce that indicates what their values are.
yeah.
And we are about to find out just how complex our system is, because the changes that are coming are going to be so complex, and there are going to be so many unintended consequences to the bills that have just recently been passed, that nobody can predict what's going to happen.
Sure.
And nobody is going to know how to fix it. And it's going to take a concerted effort on behalf of everybody to work together and have a higher view in order to find solutions. There's going to need to be a coming together of not just political minds, but of technology minds, and thinkers of all kinds are going to have to come together and try and find some solutions for the mess that is coming. It's going to, I mean, right now we're in kind of a holding pattern, but 2 months from now, well, even a month from now, who knows how long we have before this starts coming apart at the seams. But there are going to need to be some very I don't even know what word to use. I was going to say aggressive, but that's not probably the right word to use, but some coming together of minds. I hear a lot of people pontificating on Twitter and some of them are really good minds, like Eric Weinstein is a really good mind, but he's gotten himself all worked up about certain things, and he's off in that trend. And there's a guy named Naval Ravikant who is a great thinker, and he's actually doing some things that seem pretty useful. But all these thinkers, instead of being in attack mode, they're going to need to turn around and start coming in on where can we find solutions to these things.
Yeah.
You were talking about the wonderful discussion between John Vervaeke and Ian McGilchrist, and how even though they're really looking at things from two very different perspectives, they're finding a way to dialogue and a way to understand each other. Not necessarily that they agree with each other, but they're finding a way to understand, and that might change each of them in some way, that they reform based on new input that's coming in for them.
Yeah.
We need to come to that place as a world, not just as a nation.
Going back to the whole reason versus logical, one of the key differentiators there in logic, there just isn't any room for mistake. And we need to be operating with a mode of being that affords the other in any interaction room for mistake, while still, assuming the best of them, so that you can, because that's the problem. And like, whenever you get to problems of the size and magnitude that we're dealing with, there's not really great options. Whatever you do, you're going to make mistakes, and so you have to be willing to afford the person you're interacting with, um, a bit of latitude to brainstorm and to think out loud and to try some things and see what happens. Or um, you just you become overcome. I mean, I think there's I don't know how it came to be this way, but most people operate in the world in such a way that they believe, first of all, that government could potentially solve all their problems, and and then B, that there's actually a right answer. There's some right answer that a politician could find, uh, to how they should respond to X. And we all use that language, even if we're smart enough to know that the complexity of the situation doesn't really match that. But we'll still try and think, yeah, that was the we kind of dumb down our language for rhetorical reasons, right? To kind of give a little bit of extra oomph to however we see the problem, and trying to kind of put down the other side. It's this, it's this rhetorical battle of words. And um, we somehow got to stop doing that. I don't know how if that's even possible at the political level. So maybe it's got to take place somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Well, like as you were saying before, if we each take a look at our own decision making and our own behavior, and how did I contribute to the mess that the world is in at the moment, and how can I contribute to making an improvement, making things better.
Hmm.
Definitely one of the things that I can improve to help make things better is to not walk around pontificating about how if they had done it my way, everything would be fine, because obviously I contributed somehow to this mess, so I better figure out what it is. And rather than holding everybody hostage and saying, you better figure out what you did wrong, which is what our news media does right now. Our news media goes around and attacks everybody and says, you did a bunch of wrong stuff and you better figure it out. Maybe we all just need to look inside and say, where did I go wrong? What have I contributed to this? And how can I improve my communication with others? And
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of back to that conversation you did a while back on P versus NP,
mhm,
where it's very easy to recognize something good or bad or whatever, and to confuse that with expertise in that subject, right? So we've gotten into this weird place where a lot of the virtue signaling that goes on is just I call out when somebody does something bad, and we accept that as proof of someone's virtue, right? That's now this token. It's a currency of that market of like, okay, I'm definitely in the right because look how I called out this person that's bad. That's kind of like how it's easy to solve one of these, to verify the answer to um, um, one of these computer algorithms. It's easy to do that, but the actual work of finding the solution is so much more complex, and we don't seem to have, again, we don't have the patience or the appreciation for that the long path that virtue necessarily has to take to find a real solution. It's just this very quick, like, I recognize that's good, I recognize that's bad, and that's how we communicate our virtue now, is by talking rather than doing.
Hmm.
um, and that's kind of dangerous, because it becomes the two kind of, I've never seen it, the potential for the two to become disconnected is really great right now.
Well,
um,
don't you feel that that's kind of happened in the church? And I would say, at least in the United States, that's happened in the church a lot in the last.
right.
Mm, I became a Christian in 1980, so 40 years. Um, I've certainly seen this move through where if you say the right, if you believe the right things, then you're the right kind of a person.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you put the right label on yourself, you're the right kind of a person, rather than what are you actually doing to follow Christ, to live according to his,
Mhm.
to live the life that he has granted you. Last night we were having a Bible study via Zoom, and we were talking about the four friends that brought their friend on a stretcher to Jesus, and they went up onto the roof and tore the roof open and lowered him down through the roof into the crowd, and how intentional they had to be. They didn't just sit back and pray and say, oh, well, Jesus can solve this, and we'll just leave our friend in his hands and that's it. No, they worked together to come up with a plan, a solution. They took the physical effort that was necessary to get up on that roof. They tore this guy's roof apart. Um, they did what it took. And one of the things that we came up with that I thought was very interesting, somebody said, was one of the guys said, look, if you were one of those four guys and you just thought, yeah, I'm not so into this, I'm not really going to do it, but there's three other guys, the peer pressure would be so much that everybody would pitch together and do this thing
Yeah.
together. That so there's something about four people working together that motivates everybody in the group to actually get the thing done, where we become so individualistic in this country that everybody's doing your own thing, but your own thing
Yeah.
seems to be more propositional than actional. So
Yeah. It there's so many things, yeah, that you have to do. It always takes multiple people. It's funny, like this just reminded me. So we just moved into this place recently, and my fiance and I were trying. There's this very tight corkscrew staircase that goes up into the attic that was finished out, and we were trying to get a queen size bed up there that was like really, really thick mattress and not very flexible. And I was convinced we could do it. I was like, we can definitely do it, and she was convinced we couldn't. So I was like, had to talk her into trying to do it, and then we got about halfway up, and I was like, this isn't going to work. There's absolutely zero chance. And she was like, no, let's give it one more go. And so like we switched roles, and like she was now trying to talk me into it, and we eventually got it up. But it's what's funny is she wouldn't have even started that process if I hadn't talked her into it, and then I would have quit halfway if she
mhm.
hadn't been there. So it's like and I think so many things in life are that way, like where you absolutely, you need somebody that has the other half of the equation, or you're not going to get where you want to go.
That's a beautiful picture. Wow. Yeah. That's, I was listening the other day. I think he put it on his Facebook page, but there's a little video clip of Jordan Peterson talking about his wife and how what you want to find in a wife is somebody that can contend with you, not
Hmm.
somebody who pats you on the back and makes you feel like a big man all the time, but somebody who can speak truth to you and contend with you, and you can struggle together. that's really where your meaning is going to be found. And I think that's true in that should be true in political issues as well.
Mhm.
Parties that can contend with each other. That's the only way you're really going to make strides forward, is if you have two opposing views that are contending with each other, pushing each other, challenging
Yep.
each other. That's where the growth comes from. But if instead of challenging each other, you just, one of the things that I notice that often happens in marriage, or maybe it's just in our relationship, is that we can get into a contentious issue, and one or the other of us will, maybe this is what you call straw manning, but she'll make the other person's position way more extreme than it actually is. And so you're just going way out to the extremes and exaggerating their position. Or giving up and saying, oh, well, because you believe X, I just give up. And so
Yeah.
it's exaggeration kind of thing, instead of actually contending with what it is they're really saying, because maybe what they're really saying is something that could help both of you grow.
Mhm.
So I think marriage and political parties could learn a lot from each other.
I think we're going to have to develop some sort of practices for we need to have a much more complex view of what it means to be virtuous, and start trying to hold political leaders to that standard, and the whole, the name calling and the sort of reflexive backbiting. We have to start punishing that kind of political, we just there has to be, we have to start making sure that people that want to use those tactics pay some price for it, because right now it's just it's something it's a freebie, and you can get away with it because you can say, well, they did this, so I did this. So there's always that you can always you know come up with some justification or rationalization for why you're engaging in that, when it's clear that it's not moving the conversation forward in a helpful direction.
Well, it just occurred to me, the other thing that JBP always says about marriage is, yes, you can win, but what have you got then? You have a defeated opponent,
Hmm.
but you have to live with them. You can't make a life that way.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the same thing about two political parties in a nation,
Yeah.
where we have to survive and thrive together. If you so defeat the other party that, or if you can't accept their victory, with whatever it is that happens, if you can't graciously move forward with that other person, with that other, the other half of the nation,
Hmm.
there's no way you can thrive together. So
Yeah.
somehow we have to learn to work together, just like a marriage would work together. Yes, challenge each other. Yes, have your arguments, but at the end of the day, you want it to be a win-win kind of a situation, one way or another.
Yeah.
We got to
speaking
live together.
speaking of Jordan, is the conference that you were planning to go to with him, has that been canceled officially?
Yeah. They canceled it like 3 weeks ago.
Gotcha.
Yep. Well, they didn't cancel it. They rescheduled it with the potential date still unknown, because they were hoping that people would leave their fee or their initial payment
Yeah.
in place so that they could still do this in the future. So I just left my money in there, because whenever it happens, I want to be there.
Is Jordan back from rehab? I mean, like, I'm so shocked with all this going on that there's nothing in terms of his in sort of public response, which would
Well,
indicate to me that he's still pretty under all the weight of his recovery
so
from his issues.
he came back from Russia probably a month ago,
Hmm.
and they went to Florida, for him to recover in the warm weather down there. And Michaela has posted just a couple of very brief things, not much. He does post, or somebody posts something on Facebook about every 3 days. Usually it's a little video clip from some previous thing that he's done. I noticed in the last 2 or 3 days that his Facebook page has been a little bit more active. And so I'm not sure why that is, but she posted a tiny video clip 2 days ago of him operating some sort of a remote control car in the patio of whatever house they're staying in. And so there was a little piece of video of him, and he looks pretty frail.
Yeah.
But he's on his feet, and he's, she said he was having fun with the remote control car. So I think it's been a pretty brutal recovery. But she hasn't had an update. She did an update at the beginning of March, but she hasn't had an update since then that I know of. Although sometimes she puts a little update at the beginning of a podcast, but I don't listen to those podcasts, so I haven't paid attention to that.
Yeah,
I've been
makes you
very
wonder.
surprised that he hasn't entered into the fray, because in many ways, I kind of feel like the 3 years that he spent speaking around the world was kind of preparing the world for this. At least preparing an army of people who are determined to speak truth in the midst of this mess.
Yeah.
Just even that would make a difference if just people continue to speak truth into it.
Totally.
Well, Michael, as usual, this has been very stimulating. I hope we can continue our discussion of Barfield at some point in the future, because I really did enjoy what he was talking about, especially with the initial participation and the original participation and final participation idea.
Yeah.
Which is,
yeah, there's a wealth of stuff in Barfield that I feel like I've only scratched the surface of.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we can talk about that sometime in the future. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think so. I feel like my brain's working pretty slowly today, so.
Yeah, I totally feel like I'm not clicking on all cylinders. I think there's just so many distractions in the world right now that it's very hard to focus on anything else. But at the same time, I feel like it's really important to focus on anything else.
Yeah, agreed.
Along with just spending a lot of time in prayer. And thank you, and all the best to you and your fiance. What's the wedding date, by the way?
Well, it was gonna be Memorial Day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but everything's kind of up in the air right now, so we'll see. I have another friend of mine that had an April date that he just canceled it, so or didn't cancel but postponed it for later in the year. So we'll see.
So is it something you can be flexible about? I mean,
well, I mean, we were going to do something really small with just our family.
okay.
My dad was actually going to be the officiant, so and then we were going to like do some like trip afterwards, like with a professional photographer. But all of that's up in the air at the moment, so we'll see. Luckily, we're not in the position of somebody who has like a big to-do planned where you got all these deposits and things that are going to be rented out and people coming from all over the world to come see you. So we don't have that stress, which has been nice.
Yeah,
we just have our family. So
yeah, my husband was saying the other day, he said, if this was and we were just starting out and we had planned a wedding and then this came up, do you think we would go ahead and get married, or would we would we put it off until everything is over, you know? And so he really wanted to talk about that. And I think he was of the opinion that we would have gone ahead and got married somehow, even if it was just like a justice of
Yeah.
the peace, or do some kind of online thing, and then later on have some kind of a celebration. And
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of people having to make that decision. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I pray for you guys often, and I'm happy about your new house. Maybe
Thank
sometime
you.
that's a tour.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Michael.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye, Karen.